Hi, I'm Michelle Renee Hiatt of American Quilter Society. Welcome back to our Modern Victoria Hunter Star series. This is episode 6, and we are laying out our quilt. So we're going to take those 66 blocks that we made. We're going to actually only use 64 of them. You're going to have 2 left over. They will make a great label on the back of your quilt, but it's actually going to help you, give you a little wiggle room as you lay these out. Now you will notice that I have laid them out in 8, so there's 8 in a row and there's 8 rows. This quilt is, as designed, a square. You're going to want to make sure that when you're laying them out, that you're orienting them correctly. You'll notice the orientation, the seam line zigs and zags up and down. And when putting that together with the next row that's laid the opposite, it is going to form these stars, which is your hunter star. So it's really cool. You are going to want to play around a little bit with your placement of your blocks. So you'll remember back in episode 5 when we paired these together, I told you could put them together ad hoc or in different groupings. I made 4 of each of my little pairings. You're going to want to lay them out so that you're kind of spreading the fabric out. So you'll notice my gold fabric here is kind of here and there, kind of situated, spread out a bit. The red, you can see here, it kind of jumps all over. So you're going to want to make sure that you've spread them out equally, but don't get too in your head with it. There's only 11 fabrics, so at some point they're going to be close to one another, right? You just want to make sure that, well, in my head, I just wanted to make sure that none of them were being put together. All right, so I do have a couple that are a little closer than others, but for the most part, it's spread out nice and evenly. A great tip for how to do this is to lay them out and then step back and take a photo of them with your camera, and then look at them in your camera phone. And you will see if things are kind of touching each other. It's amazing what you see in a photo that you don't see when you're looking at your design wall. Us that have been doing this a while, we used to do it with a little door peeper that you could buy at a hardware store, and it would set you back some so that you could really see the color placement. Once you have your quilt laid out as you desire, making sure that you've placed your 11 different fabrics equally and distributed them, and you've checked your stars, that you are forming these stars by your placement, because if you have one of them incorrect, you'll notice that they no longer are making a star, right? But so if we have them oriented correctly, we'll start to see our stars form. Next, what I like to do, and it's really simple, is I take a flower head pin that I have marked with a 1, 2, 3, and I put them in my very first block of each of my rows, and I put the flower head pin so that the upright of the pin is at the top of the block. And this way I know as I grab these to stitch them together, when I put them back on my design wall, I know exactly which is the block 1 of row number 1 and the top of the block, all based off of this simple pin. And it really helps keep me organized. I like to chain piece my rows. So what I do is I will take the second block in each of the rows, flip it onto my first block, and I go ahead and throw a pin in it. Doesn't need to be lined up at this point. I'm just throwing a pin in it so I know that this is the side that gets stitched. And I put it down on my sewing mat upside down. And then I grab the 4th block and put it on the 3rd block and basically do the same. I throw a pin in it just saying this is the side that gets sewn, and I lay it down. Now I've gone ahead off camera and sewed the rest of this row together, but I would have grabbed the 6th block, flipped it onto the 5th, and the 8th block and sewn it onto the 7th. And then I stack them and I'm going to stitch them, all as I'm going to show you how I'm stitching these two. And then I will put them back on the board and then flip my next pairings, which I'll show you in a second. All right, so now we're at our sewing machine, and my stack that I put right sides down, I'm flipping up so that when I look at this, this is the first in my row, right? So row number 1, the first in my row, and I'm gonna go ahead and pin this properly now. So I have my cheat pin in here that tells me that this is the side that I'm gonna stitch, and I'm gonna go ahead and line this up. These are both pressed in the same direction, so they're not gonna nest. So you're gonna want to lay those seam over seam, and then I like to pin in the negative, right where those two seams aren't. I then also want to make sure that that center seam is lined up properly. Just gonna futz with this a little. And since those seams are both pressed open, I can come in here and pin in those seams. I like to use the nice big pins so I can grab a pretty decent amount of fabric. All right, I'm going to line up my top and my side. I don't really need to put a pin in here because I'm going to put it right in my sewing machine, and then I'm going to stitch on through. We're going to come on through. Remember, when you get up close to your pin, we're going to stop and pull that out. These two you could probably pull back a little so that they're out of your 1/4 inch range, and go ahead and leave them in. You just don't want to run them over. You can mess up the timing of your machine if you do that. All right, so that's row 1, 1 and 2, and now I have block 3 and 4 here, and I'm going to do the same thing, right? So I'm going to line up this seam so that's nice and perfect. Pin in that negative, line up the center seam. Go ahead and pin. I'm going to leave that back about 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to stitch. Take that pin out. There we go. So you're going to repeat that for all of your blocks. So I've sewed 1 to 2, 3 to 4. Next you would sew 5 to 6 and 7 to 8. All right, so I'm going to go press these and then we'll talk about finishing the row. All right, so we want to set our seam. And then this is row 1. So row 1, I'm going to press towards the odd number block. So I'm going to press towards the 1, the 3. So I'm going to take this and flip it. And I know this is the first block of row 1 because I have my little handy pin in here. And then we're going to press. All right. And you can give it a little hit of the magic spray. And the Rowenta's doing a fabulous job of getting that nice and crisp. All right, so that is my 1 and my 2. Here is my 3 and 4. So I'm going to press towards the 3. Each row you're going to do opposite. So I like to do the even rows towards the even blocks. And I do the odd rows towards the odd blocks. And that way, they'll come together and they'll nest. But it's also easy for me to remember. If I'm on row 3, I know I'm pressing towards the odd blocks, block numbers. All right, so let's go back and put these on the wall. All right, so when you're using this method, you always want to make sure that you go back and you put them up on the wall to make sure that you are putting them back in place properly. When you chain piece, it goes much quicker, but you also have to make sure that you're keeping your proper orientation. So it always helps to put them back on the wall. A lot of times I think, oh, I got this, I don't need to. I always regret it and end up unsewing. So always take them back to the wall. And now I'm certain of my lineup. I could also refer back to the photo I took if I think that I've gotten them confused. So I'm going to take my third and fourth block and flip that over onto 1 and 2. And I would throw a pin in here to show that this is the side I'm going to stitch. And then I would do the same with my 7 and 8 to my 5 and 6. But I've already sewn those together. So I'm going to go sew these together and we'll talk about next steps. All right, so when I'm putting my 3 and 4 together with 1 and 2, you're going to notice that the star point is now at the top. So we're going to want to take care to make sure that we are not only pinning this, but taking care when we go to stitch it. So I'm matching the same seams up. All right, so I have that seam matched up and I have my star point seam matched up here. And I'm still pinning in the negative. And if you want, you can throw a pin in down here at the bottom. But not all machines are going to like this bulk coming in first. So you might want to take 2 scrap pieces of fabric and go ahead and start with a leader. And that just gives your thread a little weight. All right, and then start your unit with your star point here at the top. And we're going to pull those pins back and then start our stitching. All right, so that helps a lot. When you find you have a lot of bulk coming through your sewing machine first, it often helps to go ahead and start with that leader. And then once I get through this, I would just bring in the other units in my row. All right, I'm going to take this and press it. So now I'm going to press. So I have row 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to press towards that 3 since it's the odd number. I'm going to set my seam, finger press, and press. You'll see your seams are coming together so nicely. Give it a little steam on demand there with the Rowenta, and then a little magic spray. What I love about the magic spray is that it's nice and light, and I feel like I can use it with all my pressing to make it nice and flat, yet it's not making it massively stiff. So I'm going to take this back to the wall, and we have one more seam to do. So it's back on the wall, and I've double checked that it's in the proper placement, and now I'm going to take my 5, 6, 7, and 8 and stitch that together with my 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's the same, we just flip it over, and we line it up. I'm going to pin this properly and stitch it. And then we'll be ready to talk about putting our rows together. All right, I finished sewing my first row together, and you would repeat that for row 2, 3, 4, all the way through 8. And remember, row 1, we've pressed towards the odd block, and row 2, we've pressed towards the even block. So this row's going this way, this row's going this way, this row's going this way. And what that will do is it'll help us nest this seam together. But there's a few other points that we're going to want to make sure that we pin and put together. So I'm going to take you through it. So I'm going to take my row 1 and flip it onto my row 2. And then I'm going to take it over to the table and pin it. So I have my row 1 on top of my row 2. This is the seam we're putting together. And my first point that I want to make sure that I've matched up is the center of what will become the star. So by sewing a 1/4 inch seam here and here, this seam point is back a 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to go ahead and pin that. So they should nest together if you've pressed them properly. And we're going to go ahead and just double check our points. I like to put a straight pin in there. And I'm going to pin and pin. And then I can remove that pin. And then remember, your star edge points don't nest. So you're going to have to pin in the negative there. I always like to start my row with a pin. And then I'm going to continue that. All right, so here we're bringing this seam together. That should nest. We don't have a star point, but I still throw in a pin. And then I'm also going back to this edge of the star and lining up those and putting a pin in that negative space. And I'm just going to work my way through the entire row, repeating that. All right, so checking the point with the point, keeping that pin straight up and down, and then I come in with 2 straight pins. And then I'm going to match up my edge here and come in here like that. And then the same here. So it does take some time, but it's worth it because your points are going to match. All right, and then we nest. That's the easy intersection, right? And then we scoot over here. I like to take my straight pin and the point and the point. And then I'm just keeping that straight with my 2 fingers underneath. That allows me to keep that pin nice and straight. And then we're going to line this up. Pin in the negative. We're going to nest. And then a few more pins, and then we'll be ready to go. And then that star edge. And then one last pin on the end here. All right, now I'm ready to sew. I like to roll this up so that 1, it's not catching on my clothes, and 2, because it's not going to get stretched out because I'm going to put it in my lap to make sure that it doesn't uncoil or get stuck as I'm trying to sew, that I'm rolling on it or anything like that. So it's nice and protected on my lap. All right, so now we're going to stitch. Remember, you're going to want to take out those pins as we come upon them. Another thing I like to do is I stitch in 3 stitches when putting my rows together, especially when I know that I'm going to press this next seam open. So I stitch in 3 and then I stitch out 3 and then back 3. And so it doesn't create a knot, but it does lock in that seam a little, and it'll allow me to 1, press it open, and then 2, as I'm putting all those rows together of my quilt, it'll help support the weight and it won't come unravel. All right, I'm just going to stitch on through. Remember, when you get close, you're going to want to take that pin out. It's done its job. All right, and then we're going to stitch on through. And it's a little bulky. Just take your time. Take out those pins. And then we're going to keep going. Get to that next pin, and we're just going to go through the entire row. You can see I'm letting the machine do the work. I'm not pulling it through. I'm just making sure it's not catching, because remember we have all these pins. Okay, I'm going to remove it. If you want to, you could throw some additional pins in. I just kind of watch it as I go, making sure I don't get any twisted sisters. No twisted seams here. Slow down at those intersections. Coming up on the end here, just want to make sure you're keeping everything nice and neat. And then as we come to the end here, we want to do the same thing. So we're going to stitch out, stitch back 3, and then stitch forward. And then that gives it a little lock at the end. All right, I'm going to take this over and give it a good press. We're going to press this open. First, you want to set in your seam. On my pressing surface, I can get about half of this done. So I'm going to press half of it right now, set in my seam. And then we're going to use the stick again, because this gets pressed open. And we're going to place this on top of the stick. And we're going to want to press this open. So this gets a little bit tough to do. And then I'm just going through and pressing it open right in front. So you definitely don't want an iron that will just steam whenever. This Rowenta just steams on demand, so I can make sure my hand is out of the way. And then I can continue working it. There we go. And then when you get to those tough interchanges, just get them open and then let the steam do the rest of the work for you. All right. I'm going to press the other set in your seam. I should say I'm going to set the rest of the seam here. And what setting the seam does is it allows the seam to fall into the fabric. So the thread you just laid down, by just heating it up, it lets that seam drop into the fibers of the fabric. And it really makes your seam much stronger. And you really want to do that, especially when you are pressing open. All right, so we're going to continue this journey of pressing open. All right, I got it started. And having the stick, one allows the steam to wick through and does kind of a quick dry, quick set. But it also gets those other seams out of the way. All right, I'm going to continue. We got our last done here. It goes pretty smoothly until you get to these star points, and then you kind of got to work it a bit. There we go. Getting in there. There we go. All right. Now that you have that seam pressed open, I'm going to get our stick out of the way, and we're going to flip it over, and now we're going to press the front. And we're going to use our Faultless Magic Spray. And I like to switch back when I'm putting my rows together back to the aerosol because it's just a little bit thicker. And so we really are, almost finished here. So we're giving it a nice spray. You will want to watch your pins a little bit, right? So I make sure at my first blocks that I'm going between those pins. And then I'm giving it a really good press. Giving it a little steam with the Rowenta as well. Right, checking out those seams are coming together nicely. I like to roll it a little, keep it nice and flat. A little more Faultless Magic. A little steam. And then remember, you're always pressing until it is dry. And roll it up a little more. And then we're going to finish it off. All right, we are ready for our next row. Now that we have rows 1 and 2 together, we would continue putting 3 onto 2, and then 4 onto 3, and so forth, all the way through the rest of your quilt. So before our next episode, put all of your rows together and then your rows into your quilt center. And then in episode 7, we're going to talk to you about how to properly measure for your borders and the proper way to put borders on. And guess what? Then we'll be finished. All right, I hope to see you for episode 7. Thank you for tuning in.